Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar, today sponsored by our friends at Rock Technologies. I'm Barbara Duke, Managing Editor here at Directions Mag, joined by our webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. If you have any questions about your connection, just drop us a note in the chat. We'll do our best to help you. We encourage you to read the latest news, articles, listen to podcasts, of course, watch more webinars over at directionsmag.com. We are standing by to take your questions today. Type those into the question pane at any time during the webinar. We will try to answer as many as possible in the last few minutes of our session today. And if we don't get to those, the good folks over at Rock will follow up with you after the webinar. We are recording today's webinar, so keep an eye on your inbox in the coming days for that recording, as well as resources and a certificate for attending today. We are excited to have Alex back with us today. She is bringing a wonderful collection of things to help you think through your cloud migration. Alex, over to you. We're excited to learn more today.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you everyone for attending today's session on the 5 W's and 1 H of cloud migration. I'm Alex Coleman, the CEO of Rock Technologies, and we're really excited about this session in particular because it's kicking off what we hope to be a series that covers the best practices, kind of the do's and don'ts around getting your GIS into the cloud. So this is a really nice launch pad. It's a 30,000-foot view of all of the little nuances that you want to consider and how best to prepare. My ask of all of you is to please, as we go through the presentation, think about the topics that you'd like to learn more about. And what about, do you have any questions maybe about those topics? You know, areas you really want us to dig in. Because as I said, this is the first, and your comments and feedback will really help us plan, you know, future sessions for this boot camp. We want to ensure that the whole GIS community and IT community are armed with everything they need to make this happen. So I thank you in advance for your assistance in that matter. And let's get to the agenda. So on today's call, we'll kind of start off reviewing why listen to us. So, you know, I mentioned I'm with Rock Technologies. Why is Rock Technologies doing a session on best practices when it comes to migrating to the cloud? So we'll talk really briefly about that and then get into the meat of it. So what are the 5 W's and the H? So first, the why. You know, everyone has a lot of reasons for moving to the cloud. There are a lot of great whys, and the more you can come up with and the more benefits to your organization, the better chance you will have to build that case. So we'll talk through some that maybe you have thought of, maybe that you haven't. And then we're going to move into the who. So who on your team, you know, who do you want on that team to make sure that you've got the right players involved to get your journey going? And then we'll move into the what. So this can be the scary one for folks, but what are you going to take with you into the cloud? So we'll talk about migration. And then where is all that wonderful GIS stuff going to go? So what does the infrastructure look like that's going to support your GIS? How do you go about building out that infrastructure plan? And then which cloud provider do you choose? And what are some of the options there? Then we'll get into the last but not least, and also sometimes one of the most important, is budget and timing. Do you have the money, and when are you going to do it? And then we'll conclude with how to start. So without further ado, a little bit about Rock. So why is Rock, why are we here talking about this? And the main reason is, honestly, this is all we do. So Rock's sole focus is looking at organizations of every shape and size across multiple verticals, understanding the GIS that they use today on premise, and then architecting out solutions for them in the cloud environment of their choice, getting them into that cloud environment, so making that migration happen, and then ongoing providing management services and support for both their IT, so meaning the cloud infrastructure, all the security and the patches and all the great stuff that goes along with cloud management, and the Esri software stack. So we also manage the enterprise, so making sure it's up to date and it's upgraded when needed, and you've got the patches going in and adding new services. So we have been doing this, and this, again, is our sole focus for over 7 years now. We have 130 customers, and with working with these organizations, literally from Fortune 100 companies, global entities, down to really small municipalities, we have found that the topics we're going to cover today don't change regardless of size of the organization. If you kind of follow these steps and think through these considerations, you're going to have a really successful cloud migration. So let's start with the why. Why move to the cloud? And again, I think, of the topics listed here, everyone probably has a couple of these off the top of their head, right? If they've considered the cloud at all. But really, this is it's a nice kind of ecosystem of wonderful reasons. So increased productivity. You can imagine, I mean, during COVID, we saw so much of this. People are working from home. They want to make sure they can connect back, and share, and do edits in real time with their GIS. They don't want to be disconnected from that system. So enabling that in the cloud is awesome. The scale, I mean, the sheer weight of users that are now accessing the great content that's being put up by GIS organizations can really fluctuate and change. I mean, are you in a situation where you're putting out hazard maps or evac maps in cases of fire or hurricanes? Are you, do you have an engineering firm and you have a lot of customers, a big customer that's going to start hitting your GIS because you're putting out content for them? Having an infrastructure that can really scale to the use is critical, right? You can't have these services going down. Modernizing GIS. Are you taking advantage of all the great stuff that's out there now? Can you? Or are you limited by what's happening, the restraints of kind of that on-premise, infrastructure that you're on right now? So really, I mean, when you look at all of this, it's I like to say it's really liberating your GIS and getting it in a house where it's going to be up and you can expand and you can modernize and you can collaborate. So all of these great reasons. And why people use managed services sometimes, something to consider. And I say this, yes, we do it, but you know what? We're not the only game in town. There are a lot of great companies that do managed services, and even a few that really specialize in the GIS space. But why do folks consider this? There are three real main reasons. Staff augmentation has been one, again, regardless of size of organization, there is a real staffing shortage right now of one, super talented GIS people, and two, IT folks that can really manage an enterprise stack, sometimes on premise, but definitely in cloud environments. So organizations are looking outside and saying, how can we make this happen without taxing internal resources? The second, that need and desire to modernize and expand, right? If you are spending most of your time maintaining a software, you're spending less of your time inventing and creating great content. So organizations look for someone to kind of, again, step in, take all that admin, all of the administrative tasks off their plate so they can really innovate. And then lastly, that time to cloud, right? Just saying, we know we want to get there. I'd rather have, put that on someone else's shoulders and have them, kind of run the show and get us there in a timely and efficient manner. So those are some of the key reasons, why people go and why, when needed, they might partner with someone else to do it. All right, so who do we want on this journey? This is a really critical piece because a lot of players inevitably will get involved with this decision. And the sooner you can build that team and get the right people on board, excuse me, the more success you're going to have. Interestingly enough, we're seeing the move to the cloud come from, or the mandate, I guess, or the hope to move to the cloud come from all of these places. In some cases, we have, state agencies or state governments that have said, hey, we're going to the cloud, period. So everyone's got to go. We've seen really large companies say to their teams, hey, if you want to add a new software service, that's all well and good, but you've got to get it into the cloud and you've got to get someone to manage it for you. So sometimes it's the stakeholders, sometimes, or, the kind of that C-level, executive level that's making those decisions. Sometimes it's IT, for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's, let's just remove the enterprise from our day-to-day space and move it into the cloud. And then you've got GIS, of course, for a lot of the reasons we talked about before. So, regardless of where the move is coming from, it's really important that all of these folks are involved and that they understand what their role is going to be. What information do they have to provide to the other team members to ensure that you can plan correctly for the move? So again, really important, I would say one of the most successful migrations we've seen, start when all of these folks are at least in somewhat alignment on what's about to take place. All right, so what? This is the part that usually is scary for folks. So what are we, this is all about migration. What are we moving to the cloud? This is probably, again, it's an extremely important part of your journey. So there are a lot of things to consider. If you're a current user of ArcGIS Enterprise, think about, what do you want in this new environment? Is it just what you have deployed on premise? Would you like to add new services? Are you thinking, hey, you know what? Maybe we want to add image server, and we want to add monitor, or geo event. These are great things to consider prior to looking at your infrastructure, because it's going to have a big impact on how you build out the environment in the cloud to support your GIS. For those of you, and this is quite a few folks actually that we've worked with, maybe you've been in ArcGIS Online and now you're making the move over to Enterprise. So it's a matter of considering, okay, what, if anything, do we want to keep in ArcGIS Online? What do we want to move over? What does that look like? What's our timeline for getting that content moved over? And then of course there's things like imagery and all of the rest of the wonderful content that goes around in our GIS ecosystem and third-party applications. But really having a strong understanding of what all of these pieces are, it really heavily impacts, again, how you're going to build out that infrastructure. So the folks that have done great preparation have done things like inventory lists, gone through and looked and been like, when's the last time this application was actually used, things like that, and make those wonderful determinations about, what really you want to go with you into the new place. And it seems like a daunting task to some, right? Especially folks that have a really mature GIS presence. It can feel like that. But I can tell you, and this is true, there's a lot of upside here. And I would say the top one that people really get a kick out of, even though it feels daunting, is they actually got to clean their closets out. Got rid of all the old stuff that had just been clogging up, resources and hadn't been utilized for who knows how long, and only taking with them, it's like this fresh start. It's like how you feel when you clean your closets, really. You're only taking with you what you want for the future. It's also a really cool opportunity to sunset old habits. As we all know, ArcGIS Pro is the future, right? This is happening, it's real. So it's a perfect time, when you make a migration like this, it's a great time to take a look at some of the maybe old behaviors or old workflows that have been in existence and say, you know what, we're starting new. Not only did we get rid of a bunch of old stuff, but we're going to start out with the best habits possible for this new GIS world that we have to come. And then lastly, I can't tell you, well, I can tell you how many folks we have upgraded along with the cloud journey. So it's a great time too, if you haven't already, make sure you're, when you go to the cloud, you might as well let's upgrade to the latest version. Again, this is the perfect time to add new services. Excuse me. And that should all be part of your planning. But this is truly, when we talk to folks that have gone through this journey, whether our clients or not, these three pieces of the puzzle have definitely been some of the huge benefits that they've gotten out of it. And the work was worth it. Let's put it that way. All right, so we know the who. We've got our team that's going to work with us to get to the cloud. We know what we're taking to the cloud. So the next two pieces are really critical, right? It's where's all this going to go? And so we're going to talk a little bit about building your infrastructure to support all of your great content and the cloud providers and different options that are available to you there. So here's the infrastructure. And again, this is a really big piece of the puzzle. So clearly the what is going to live in this house plays a huge role in how you're going to do it, how you're going to identify, the server size requirements to support things like your database? Do you need, storage for things like imagery? How big does your ArcGIS server really need to be? The what and the workflows really kind of identifies the needs when it comes to building your infrastructure. But it's not just that. It's really important too to understand things like security. What type of security policies does your organization have? How do you need to build this out to ensure that you're in compliance with those security concerns? Things like uptime. One of the really great things about the cloud is that you can build extraordinarily resilient environments. So, really understanding what your uptime tolerance is goes into how you're going to architect the house that your GIS is going to live in. And again, I would say, and also backup and retention. It's amazing how there are still so many, organizations, companies, et cetera, out there now that there's not much of a backup and retention policy in terms of how often does your data get backed up? Where does it live? What if something happened? How do you get access to that data, right? Or even your entire environment. So those are great and strong considerations to make when you're creating your infrastructure. They can impact cost, certainly, and they definitely impact how you architect out the solution. Lastly, or not lastly, but also important is, how are you going to access for this environment? So for the primary users, the folks that are editing against that enterprise geodatabase, how are they getting that access? So that's where those virtual desktop solutions come into play. So defining what the best virtual access is for your team is also, just as critical as anything else. Two things I would say on this that are just kind of public service announcements, for lack of a better term, is in our experience, we would just say, be very aware of any kind of out-of-the-box solutions here. If there's one thing we have learned in the years we've done this, that unless you are truly doing a brand new base deployment of enterprise with no migration necessary, you're just starting from scratch, no two GIS deployments are exactly the same. I mean, wouldn't it be great? But it's the honest truth, they aren't. So, if you see a solution where it's like, hey, we can just throw everything on one server, or you can just use this and it's going to be the perfect thing for you. It literally, generally 9 times out of 10 is not the case. We don't want people to go down a road and end up having to, rebuild a system. It's super important that, this is a very methodical process. This is something that you actually really spend a lot of time thinking about, because, that it can make your journey, your first foray into the cloud, a great experience, or it can be a very troubling one. And we don't want people to be troubled by it because it's awesome. So, and I would also say, don't fear for asking for help, especially on this piece, outside of your organization, if it's needed. This is, certainly where you would want to do that. Again, just to make sure that that journey is a positive one and, not a negative one. So in addition to obviously now, understanding your infrastructure needs, you also have to know where that is going to live. And as we know, there are a lot of options. There's obviously the big 3 we have up here, massive market share up here. We're looking at like 65% of the overall market. I think it's actually a little bit more now as of end of Q2. But there are still private clouds and there are still other vendors outside of these 3. But interestingly enough, even among the top 3, there are a lot of differences. And there are things that you really want to think about. Things like, what are the cost savings plans that they have? And not just initially upon setup, but ongoing. Once you get that environment kind of right-sized, there are some really interesting triggers that you can pull in each of these organizations to save money. They vary quite a bit in some ways. So knowing that kind of ahead of time is really great when you're starting to plan budget. There's also different machine types and availability depending on the cloud provider. And another kind of fascinating or fun fact, as someone as Brock would say, with the shipping issues that we've all been experiencing in a lovely way over the last couple of years, we've found that's actually impacted the cloud business as well. So, sometimes servers, maybe the server you think you want to use isn't available. So those are really important things to look at before you decide. The other piece is, do you want to manage it yourself? So do you want this cloud environment to be one that you own and you provide all the security for? Or would you prefer someone else to do it? The biggest differences here is generally if it is not self-managed, if you're someone's tenant, that is where you can get things like uptime guarantees. So meaning that partner that company that you work with is on the hook to make sure your machines are running 24/7, and things like that. Self-managed, obviously, all of that is on your purview. So a lot of things to consider here, and it can be a little bit of research, but again, when that preparation's done on the front end, and you make the best decision for you of the cloud provider, you're in a good spot. All right, so now we've got the who, we've got our team built, we know what we're taking, we know where it's going. Now we've got to decide when, right? When are we going to pull the trigger? And these are the biggest these are the biggest topics or things you want to prepare for when you're making that consideration. I would say the biggest determiner of when people actually make the move is budget. That's probably not a big surprise, right? But understanding that budget and when that budget is going to be available is key. We have folks that have honestly started planning this out and got budget numbers 2 years out. And that's a really good thing. Or it's not a bad thing, let me put it that way. The sooner you can start preparing and figure out financially when you can make the move, the sooner you can start ensuring that all the little pieces of the puzzle, the rest of the pieces of the puzzle are in place to help during that transition. I would say this, just again, a public service announcement. If you do plan your budget, say 2 years out and you get approval, or you get people saying, yeah, we think we can do this in 2024, I would highly suggest, at least 6 months prior to your go live, prior to when you're going to kick this off, you really reassess and make sure that, the GIS is basically the same, so that your infrastructure requirements haven't changed so much it impacts your budget. So good rule of thumb, if you know you're planning, a couple years out or whatnot, I would pad the budget and think about maybe 15-20% just to be safe. It can't hurt, right? The other piece is staffing. Who is going to be required to make this happen, and are they available? Is what functions do the IT folks have to do? What functions GIS? Etc. What are all the players going to be doing? Do they understand their roles, and are they available? Again, highly recommend that there is some sort of project manager leading this team because there can be a lot of moving parts, especially if you're doing this on your own. Testing, equally important. So again, for mature GIS organizations, you have a lot of stuff running. You're going to move it to the cloud. You're going to migrate it up there. And someone's got to test it, right? We've got applications, we've got really great map services, all this good stuff. We have to make sure that you test it before you go live for obvious reasons, but testing can take time. So building that into people's schedules, making them very uber aware that that's coming is super important. And then if you are a company that's new to the enterprise, obviously there'll be some training on transitioning over to potentially using Portal and feature services and all that great stuff. If you are a mature organization and you're migrating to the cloud, honestly, not much is going to change. It's just all your stuff will hopefully be working better, faster, and you're going to be in the cloud. How long does it take? So really anywhere, and this is a big swing, but it can be anywhere from about 2 to say 24 weeks. So again, brand new, you're going to just install a base deployment and get to work, and there's no migration. You can get running 2 to 3 weeks. If you're a really large organization, like say some of the departments of transportation that we've worked with that have just a lot of stuff running, that migration can take a little bit longer. But again, the important thing is just kind of planning it out, get your timeline, understand when the cloud's going to be deployed, who's going to be installing and configuring the services, the migration, and then of course planning your cutover into the environment. All right, so we know the who now, who's coming with us. We know what's coming with us, where it's going to go, and when it's going to happen. So once you have all that, it's really about the how. So how do you get there? How do you get all of that information? And one thing we are going to follow up with just to help is, a couple of tools that folks have used in the past to help kind of build that case and get the information they need. The first is a cloud assessment. You can look at all of the questions on that assessment to get a sense of how you need to start thinking about your current infrastructure and your current services and all that good stuff. We have a return on investment tool if you need help building your financial case, as well as some other finance documents that can help if there's CapEx versus OpEx challenges. And then some success stories, just of people talking about the move, the benefits that they realized after doing so, and all of that good stuff. So I know that again, that is kind of again that 30,000 foot view of everything you should consider, the things that the most successful migrations we've seen did consider that helped with their move to the cloud. So with that, I think we have one more polling question just about if you've tried to move to the cloud in the past, what are your blockers, or what were your blockers? And that's even a good thing to know, right? Because those blockers, that's obviously the first challenge to overcome. And thinking about how to prepare and all the information that you need, generally there's a solution for that blocker in this deck here. But without, I guess, in summary, we've got the polling question, and then I will open it up for any general questions. And I just want to reiterate too, please, if there are any of these areas that you're interested in, that you'd really like to see us do deep dives on, don't be shy, let us know. Again, this is all we do, and we really want to enable people to make these decisions and do this in a successful way. So we'd love to hear from you, as it will certainly inform future sessions for us. And that is it for me, unless we have any questions.
Someone does have a question about the key factors affecting the cost.
Yes, so the key factors affecting the cost, generally speaking, is the what's coming with you piece. So you're looking at, right, so what type of GIS system do you have running currently? What is the size and complexity of your setup? Do you want a production, staging, and development environment? Do you require high availability? The cost is really related to, again, the complexity, the availability demands, and in some cases, the security requirements, around your organization. Those are probably the big three.
Excellent. Well, we are just about out of time, but folks, do make a note of her address there. And then one more question we'll squeak in here. How do I choose a provider?
The cloud provider piece, that's certainly something, if you're interested, shoot me an email, because there really are some nuances there. Mm-hmm. So depending on, the requirements that, you might have and how you're set up, we can certainly recommend some ideas. But, other than really kind of that, that brass tacks of looking and doing the research and figuring out, okay, what type of servers do they have? What type of needs do I have? What do their savings plans look like? That's generally how people go about it. It can be a little bit of a long task, a lot of research there, but we could certainly point you in the right direction if we had a better idea of your current setup.
That's great. And I know that you shared that slide, that you have several resources coming folks' way.
Yeah.
But just know, folks, they really have a full complement of ways to help you think through this process, and certainly step in and be helpful along the way. Well, thanks, Alex. We really appreciate you being here today and sharing your expertise. A little shout out to Jen as well. She's always helpful in helping keep logistics working in the background. We appreciate her as well. We hope that everyone makes it a great day. Tell a friend about Rock and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.